Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The reason I said evening is because I know for a fact that most of you are watching this in the dead of night. My content definitely seems like the kind you watch at 2 a.m. in the morning when you absolutely have nothing else to watch, but you don't feel like sleeping. That's probably just me, though. My headset broke, so I had to get it replaced. That's why I sound so different. And the footage you see in the background is some good old surf gameplay, a classic staple in commentary videos. Albeit in Counter-Strike Source because I don't feel like downloading CS2. I've been playing the game mode a lot recently. The map I'm playing on is called Interference, and it's a pretty beautiful map. In fact, because it's a good-looking map is precisely why I wanted to beat it. I eventually did beat it and uploaded the full footage on my other channel if you're interested. Other than the set piece itself, the most interesting thing that stuck out to me is the map Skybox. Most of the surf maps I've played had interesting skyboxes actually, and a couple others with interesting set pieces as well. But we're only focusing on the skybox for now. The concept of skyboxes, whether they're 2D or 3D, is something I held interest for ever since I started mapping. I've always seen it as a cute little way of making the map seem bigger than it actually is. It showcases the idea that video games are just smoke and mirrors at the end of the day. Skyboxes are really good for atmosphere when used right, and they are something I would want to implement into a game someday. For the past few months or so leading up to the point of which the game's development began, and during when I was still working on Errand Run, I've worked on multiple 3D projects on the side. Most of them were made for learning purposes, while only one of them were actually made for a game jam. While some implementations may be broken, you could see how I've slowly gotten better with each project. Fun fact, Skirmish was actually going to be a wave-based FPS during the very early planning stages of development. I felt that I had gained enough knowledge to make something like that, but then I thought it was best to settle on something I'm more familiar with. After I'm done with Skirmish, I'll probably just go back to making small projects for the sole purpose of learning things. That FPS idea is not completely off the table though, so THT III confirmed? In all seriousness, True Human Tribulation 3 will be a thing in the future. In fact, I know exactly what suffix to give it when the time comes, and it references the name of an unfinished project I worked on in the past. A common pattern I seem to notice in most franchises is that they usually get things settled and established by the third entry, and they're often considered the great entry point for newcomers. Examples include Shin Megami Tensei 3, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3, Final Fantasy 3, Castlevania 3, and Sonic 3. The point I'm trying to convey here is that the third game would probably be the most important project in my life. Not only in acting as a good entry point for newcomers, but also in actually conveying the main idea and themes of the series. Which is a trait that all my games up to this point don't have due to their nature of being borderline arcade games. Taking into account that I will be attending college sometime during spring of next year, it would probably take a long time before I feel like making a third game. During that time, I will try my best to gain some sort of reputation and make friends. Who knows, maybe I'll end up gathering a team? I wouldn't hold my breath, though. Enough about the hypotheticals, let's talk about the now. This video is an overview of the 0.2.0 alpha update and its changes. If you wish to keep better track of the game's progress, I suggest you check out the Discord server or the GitHub repo. Both are linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. The first enemy I've added to the game is perfectly fine the way it is. Its behavior is predictable and easy to understand, so it's almost always your fault if you were to get hit. And the player has multiple options at their disposal to deal with a clump of them at once. In terms of enemy balance, I would want the player to at least react differently, depending on what enemy or group of enemies they are currently facing. I don't want combat to be completely mindless, if you know what I mean. The bare minimum for me is to design the game so it would require your full attention. So far, I think I did good enough in that regard. Oh yeah, the game is hard and unforgiving, by the way. At the time of writing this, one person besides me had survived all three waves. And that's probably due to the benefit of having made this game in the first place. Is it a problem? I don't know, maybe. I think the difficulty fits the game, to be honest. You are playing as a regular human after all, with your adversaries consisting of monsters who not only have numbers, but are much more stronger than you as well. Given the circumstances, of course it would be difficult. Given its nature as an arcade game, you don't even get sent back that much if you were to die anyway. The average run of the game takes like 4 to 6 minutes. If it becomes that much of a problem, I'll consider making the game easier and take suggestions. So don't forget to leave your feedback in the comments. Back to the topic at hand, if there even was a topic. One of the ghoul's major weaknesses is that you could just walk past them and be unharmed for the most part. Eventually you do get hit and the chance increases if you try to walk past a group of them. This is where I transition to talking about the new enemy. The wretch is exactly what you think it is. A floating torso that wields a giant sword stained with the blood of her previous victims. The story behind her design is a bit more comedic than most. When it comes to making art, always bet against Tyler. I've long since accepted that programming and IT is probably the only thing I'll actually get good at in my lifetime. Sure, I could feel myself getting better the more I draw art, but I hold less passion for it compared to programming. Pixel art is all I could really manage for now. One of the things I've always had trouble with is drawing legs. I just didn't feel like going through the excruciating pain of drawing another walking animation, so I decided that the enemy would not have legs at all, also known as the root of my suffering. I've also added a new sub-weapon to the game, the basketball, or just the ball for short. The basketball sub-weapon is very different compared to the knife, and that's very important. This is because while the knife sets the baseline, the ball defines how sub-weapons should be balanced going forward. To reiterate my point from before, like enemies, each sub-weapon should at least force a player to play differently, and the basketball is the perfect example of this. The code I've written for each sub-weapon is very flexible. This gives me a lot of control over what I want the sub-weapon to do, and what techniques it offers, as you could see from the footage. Now that there are two sub-weapons in the game, it's only customary to provide the player the right to choose which one they would rather start with. So I added the sub-weapon selection menu, which shows up before the game actually starts. The menu gives enough information about a particular sub-weapon, the weapon techniques that will be available to the player, and how much morale it costs to use either of them. I've also cared enough to give each sub-weapon and technique an official name to make them sound cooler than they actually are. Those names are only going to be referred in this menu, by the way. In the actual code, boring names like knife or ball heavy are used. In a way, this menu also functions as an impromptu difficulty slider if you take into account that each sub-weapon will force you to play differently. Am I the only one who cares about this? Most likely, but this also means sub-weapons don't exactly have to be equal in terms of balance. The future is looking bright with the potential sub-weapons will bring to the table in terms of replayability. I can predict that this potential will be realized with later games. For now, I'll focus on finishing this one. You may have noticed that I left out most of the details, and that's because I want you to try out the game yourself and see what you think. Feedback is very much appreciated since I rarely get any. As I said before, the game is open source and the links to the repository is in the description. As of writing this script, I'm working on miscellaneous changes before working on the last enemy and sub-weapon. I can certainly say for sure that the game is now in mid-development hell. I've noticed that there's now a noticeable difference between the time spent on creating new assets for the new features and actually implementing them into the game itself. This could be chalked up to programming becoming less and less essential as time goes on. Today, implementing something required less lines of code than it would be during the beginning of the project's development. I'll try my best to push through, though. That's all I have to say for now. Make sure to leave a comment about your thoughts, and remember, our birthright as players in this game of life could never be fully extinguished.